Hi, this is Praios and I'm a professional gambler. We are live now. Today we will talk about concepts you need, adjustments, and essentially this will be about building reads in live and online poker. At first I will give my initial thoughts on the concept, and afterwards we will look into Phil Galfond's video about the things, and I will also give my commentary regarding the things he says. And yeah, before we start, consider to also check out my other channel. It's Finance with Axel, and especially my newest video is very good. And if you are also affected by the FTX scandal, or if you just want to know what it is all about, where billions got stolen, watch this video. Invested a lot of time and effort. It's very good. And again, thank you, Phil Galfond. And yeah, don't forget that if you want to push your poker game to the next level, you find a lot of helpful links in the description, like Holdem Manager, courses you could take, and most important, solvers. Solvers is the most important thing you need nowadays. But yeah, let's now get into the video. Adjustments are really important, and this is not only true for poker, it's true for life and business in general. I mean, let's make another example. Nokia. Not sure if you know the name anymore, but this was the company that was making like 70% of all mobile phones before the smartphone got invented by Apple. And they completely missed that trend and continued to make these old iPhones without internet and all that stuff. They said smartphones are just bullshit, nobody needs that. And the company that was worth a ton of money and the biggest phone company in the world got down overnight and was almost busted. So yeah, adjustments are not only needed in poker. You need to continue learning and adjust, and keep up with how the world is developing. And otherwise, you will not be successful in life. Anyways, let's now come to poker and see what Phil Galfond has to say.
Hey everybody, Phil here. I got a couple of questions about adjusting to specific opponent types. And I want to talk to you about a general adjustment concept that I think is super, super important. And from there, I want to talk about building reads. The most common question I've gotten through.
By the way, if everyone plays perfect, no adjustments would actually be needed. If everyone is playing GTO, Game Theory Optimal, this would mean that they play the perfect strategy given the strategies of their opponent. And nobody has any reason to divide from that strategy, because choosing another strategy would make them worse off. But obviously, in reality, nobody plays GTO, so you will have to make adjustments based on the playing style of your opponents. And on top of that, you don't want to play in a game where everyone is a GTO wizard. It's not profitable. The house will take rake, and in the end, if you are all equally good, the house will only profit and take off the rake, and you all are worse off if you play long enough. So you need games with weaker players, and where reads and making adjustments based on the players are really important.
Throughout these adjustment videos is, Phil, how do you go about building reads? So by the end of this video, I'll walk you through that as well. So I recently did a video.
By the way, there are also other videos of mine where I talked about specific player types, often also with Phil as guest star, if you call it guest star. I mean, just watching this video and give my commentary as well. And you can can look into these as well if you are struggling with a certain opponent, for example, a maniac.
On how to adjust to somebody who is underbluffing, specifically underbluffing rivers. And I talked about the many ways in which you take advantage of that, not just on the river.
Yeah, I think we watched this video as well on my stream, and it should also be up on YouTube.
I recommend you check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing. I got a few questions and a couple, specifically asking, can you exploit an underbluffer through aggression, or is that futile? And another question asking, how do you adjust to somebody who's not value betting thinly enough? And actually, these two specific questions, they were longer questions. They kind of go a long way out of where I'm going to talk about today. But they brought up an important concept. They made me think of an important concept that I really want to talk about. So when somebody is making a mistake, whether it be not value betting thinly enough, not bluffing enough,
what is also really important, you have to recognize a mistake. Otherwise, he might be getting away with it, or he might be doing it because of the general player tendencies in the game. And it might be the perfect adjustment against most people, but not against you. And yeah, it's really important that you capitalize on these things and that you see what he's doing wrong and then make the appropriate adjustments. Otherwise, you will leave a lot of money on the table. And that's why you should pay attention at all times and not do something on the side, for example, in online poker, watch TV or something, because then you would miss these things. And also on live tables, you should pay attention even when you are not in the hand, because there could be important reads that you could gather while not in the hand yourself. Because many people make that mistake. They go smoking or talk to their neighbor, do something else, play on their phone, whatever, and don't pay attention. And that's another mistake you should not make. Otherwise, it would take you way longer to make adjustments and build reads. And also keep in mind that he might be playing different against you than against other players. Because obviously, people also make adjustments based on what they think about their opponent.
That does something to the range that they're betting.
One example would be, if I play against a loose passive calling station, I would obviously down bluff him at all or very little. But when I think that you are a big nit who is way overfolding, I would bluff a lot against you. So my playing style could differ a lot based on the opponents I'm in with the hand. So also keep that in mind.
They're being aggressive with, but it also does something to the range that they're not betting. It has to. A lot of people think, oh, well, this player, is super passive and they're just not bluffing enough. But I, can't bluff them very well because they call a lot, or because they're so passive, maybe they're trapping a little bit more. But here's the thing. If, let's say, you raise button and the big blind calls.
By the way, just a general read of the player type he describes, very passive, not folding enough. Often it is a case that these players actually fold, but they just consider folding once it's expensive. So pre-flop, it's too cheap. On the flop, on the turn, the pot isn't big enough, and they like to peel, and they also always talk to themselves, oh, okay, I can hit with draw, blah, blah, blah. A bottom pair might still be good enough, yada, yada, yada. But when the sizes get bigger, these guys often still fold. So keep that in mind.
Flop is whatever. They check, you check. Turn is whatever. They check. So let's say that in this spot, this is called a turn probe opportunity. A probe bet is when your opponent had the impetus on the previous street, they check back. Now you're first to act. You have the opportunity to bet. So this is a probe opportunity, turn probe opportunity. Let's say that they miss basically all their bluffs in this spot that a solver would bet. So what do you know? You know that their probing range is way too strong. So when they do probe, you're going to fold a lot. But you have to keep in mind that all of these hands that were supposed to bluff in this turn probing range, those hands had to go somewhere. They're now in the turn checking range. And so now when they check, even if they check all of the hands they're supposed to check, they've also checked these extra ones that they're not supposed to check, that they're supposed to bluff with. And because they're bluffs, they're weak. And so now instead of having, let's say, a balanced 60% of their hands range, they have 75% of hands, and that extra 15 is weak. So their range as a whole has been weakened. And so now, even if they defend perfectly according to which hands are supposed to check call and check raise, like in a solver, they have those pesky 15% of extra weak hands.
Yeah, he's having an excellent approach. If you recognize something, like he is checking too much, he's not betting enough, then you should think about the range implications of this behavior, then make the appropriate adjustments.
That they just are going to have to fold because they're too weak. For the most part. Now, obviously, some of those are potential semi-bluffs on the turn, and they can check call or they can check raise, whatever. But essentially, anytime somebody doesn't put hands in a certain range, they end up in the other range, and that range becomes potentially attackable, more attackable, or less attackable. Same thing happens on the river. And so on the river, it's a little bit more clear. Let's say they check call flop, turn goes check, check, and now they check the river. So here, let's say they're not bluffing enough. Now, when they bet, you should fold because their range is too strong. But also when they check, in addition to those, let's use the same numbers. So 60% of hands that were supposed to check, and they're supposed to call a pot size bet with 30% of them, which is half. Now they've checked 75, and they only have 30% calling hands, but they have 45% folding hands. So they're actually going to overfold this spot because they've just put weak hands in that range that are not supposed to be there. And the same thing happens with people who don't.
Yeah, that's also the effect I was talking about. These guys like to see a lot of cards, especially if they can still improve, but then fold on the river.
Value bet enough. So let's go back to the turn probe opportunity. Let's say somebody's.
So maybe my analysis wasn't even being correct. So it could also be that these guys like to chase draws, and it's not about the size of the bet, but also about the street and if you can still improve. So with missed draws, obviously on the river, nothing more to come. You cannot improve anymore. So at least then he gets to fold, even if he would call flop and turn.
Just like, let's just use the opposite example to illustrate a point, which is, somebody on the turn in a probe opportunity is betting all of their potential semi-bluffs. So they have an open ender, they have a gut shot, they have a flush draw, they love to bet. They have like a future flush draw blocker and an overcard. They love to bet. So they find all the bluffs and maybe even too many bluffs. But when they have, whatever it may be, mid pair, good kicker, or weak top pair that's supposed to go for 2 streets of value, they don't like to. It makes them uncomfortable. So they check those hands. Well, now they have a checking range that's too strong because so their betting range is too weak, and you know what to do against that. You call a lot and raise a lot. And then once you call down, assuming they bluff river appropriately with their now weakened range. But they also now have added some potential value bets, or would be value bets, should be value bets, to their checking range. So their checking range now, instead of being 60% that's well balanced, it's 60% with that extra 15% pretty good hands. And so now you don't want to attack that range. You want to underbluff against that range. You don't want to, you might not want to go quite as thinly for value, but most of the value hands can still value bet. But they're going to call more often because they have those hands left over in their checking range. So the point I wanted to illustrate.
And that's also an interesting one. Yeah, it's basically the type of player that is like bluffing all the missed stuff and maybe also betting his good things, but all the things in between he's going check call. So if he checks, you can be sure that he has like a medium strong hand, which he probably is gonna call down, and then bluffing would be a terrible idea.
Is, whatever the adjustment we're talking about, whatever the leak is, because I can make YouTube videos for the next 10 years, and we won't cover every specific spot that could ever come up in the game of poker. I want you to be able to think through, all right, well, I know this.
Yeah, I also think he should make more examples for PLO. I mean, it's mainly a PLO player, but all these examples are for No Limit Holdem.
About my opponent, and I know what to do against that. I know how to adjust to that. But what does that mean about their other ranges? And how do I adjust to that? It's a super important part of adjusting to specific opponents. And I play a lot of heads-up poker, so it's always front of mind for me. What is wrong about their range in the most obvious spot? And then those hands that are missing from that range, or those hands that are added from that range, they're either added or removed from a different range, and you get to attack that too. And you don't necessarily attack it on that specific street. It could be on a later street, like you've seen me talk about in previous adjustment videos. The adjustments are not always super obvious and straightforward, but basically every range mistake that you make has a domino effect, and it impacts all the other ranges you have, and that compounds.
But keep in mind that this is only true if it's getting exploited. Sometimes this could be the best strategy, giving the strategy your opponent uses. But yeah, you have to be careful. If you exploiting the leaks of your opponent too heavily, they might recognize and then counter adjust, and then you have to adjust again. And that's basically the game of poker: adjustments and counter adjustments, and this all the time. So he thinks that I think that he thinks. So yeah, it's on many levels, and yeah, you basically have to make adjustments all the time, especially when you found a weakness and your opponent, maybe if he's thinking as well, sees what you are doing and then also makes adjustments. So it's very complicated, although it seems easy.
Street by street. And so even the best players in the world, by the time they get to the river, their range is out of whack. And if you can figure out in which specific way it's out of whack, that's how you figure out how to beat them. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you all for the questions. I know I actually didn't answer any specific questions that the commenters meant to ask, but made me think of a great concept. So one question that I've been getting a lot that I can actually answer is, how do you go about developing reads? This is a very common question, and I didn't want to make a full video on it because it's actually, there's not a lot to it.
Actually, I'm not that good in making reads, but especially if you play live poker, you can learn a ton from the behavior, how your opponent speaks, the tempo he's doing things, and yeah, his general, I mean, body language and stuff. So I think people who are good, and especially if you play against people who are not paying enough attention or are drunk, but which happens a lot in live games, especially in good ones, then you could make very, very good reads and exploit your opponents even harder. Obviously, online, this becomes harder as you cannot look your opponents in the face. But yeah, even then, you could develop some reads. Yeah, for example, some bet sizing reads. For example, your opponent might only overbet with bluffs or for value. That's a very valuable read. Or he might bet a little bit smaller when he has nothing and a little bit bigger when he has something. And this is very valuable. That's why I also advise people often to use one size only, that people cannot read anything in that. I mean, often people think that it's not possible to read anything in your bet sizes, but often it is. And yeah, they just don't know. And yeah, also online, also bet sizing obviously is a big thing. And yeah, how fast people make their decisions often also mean certain things. But it's different from opponent to opponent.
There is a lot to it, but there's not a lot to explain in video format. So essentially, the main thing I want to emphasize is that you should really focus on hands that are shown down. I'm talking about live poker here, by the way. But when you're playing, and it's very common that you will feel like somebody's playing really aggressively, or you will feel like somebody's folding a lot. You really, I hate to say it because like you're trying to process information all the time. But you really can't trust yourself. And those,
yeah, especially in live poker, where like 20 hands an hour get played, and maybe you see like 4 with this opponent and he just got good hands. But yeah, for online, it's way easier to figure out how aggressive your opponent actually is. Especially because you usually, especially against the regulars, get way more hands in. And there's a tool called Holdem Manager. I have also linked it below. which will give you a heads-up display. Basically, a lot of numbers you can customize. And there, for example, you can see how often, what his aggression factor is, or how much he re-rates his preflop and all that good things. Way better than a human can. So it's not allowed on every side, but where it's allowed, I highly recommend to use it, as this gives you an enormous edge against all people not using it. And what is also really important, build your own customized HUD, or get some from a pro who used a lot of time building his HUD. Because if you just have the standard HUD with like 4 numbers, it's not helping that much, but you can get a customized one with like 16 numbers and many pop-ups to get really in the nitty-gritty stuff and analyze it down to the last detail. And that's what you want. And often you even have the time. You need to learn how to use your HUD and learn where everything is and what you need and in what situation you need which set. But then this is a tool really great. And you even can watch TV, because the reads are made for you from the software, and better than you could process them anyways.
Feelings about about things that are statistical. Now, if you're actually tracking how often they're betting the turn and you're tracking how often they're folding the river, that's a different story. You can have some real data, but it also doesn't tell you the whole story. So I've sometimes played against people who seem really aggressive, and I'm like, okay, well, this person's feels like they're pushing me out of every pot, and so I'm gonna make a stand. I'm gonna call them down, and then what it turns out is the case is they're just like never slow playing, and they're going way too thinly for value, and so they're still like they're really aggressive with a pretty strong range, because they're just missing some bluffs and they're adding too many value. And now, this person that I feel like's been running me over, they've been running me over with top pair, and making me fold second pair. And now I call them down with third pair and I lose. So that's one of the reasons you can't really trust non-showdown aggression or passive play or folding.
I think to a certain degree you can. I mean, if someone is going crazy like every hand, obviously something seems to be off. But you have to be cautious, and the sample size should be big enough. You should not make a read based on 3 hands or something, because that could just be variance and he's just picking up good hands.
And the other reason is just that you're first of all, like, we're terrible at estimating things like that. Our memories are, there's emotion involved, and so.
And my brother plays a lot live. His style, I would describe it as maniac or maniac-like, but it's like more like lag, very aggressive, playing too many hands, and I think he's probably more profitable in the average live tables than I am, because people go crazy against him. They basically assume that he's always bluffing and never has a hand, and we just look him up way too loose. And also pre-flop, they go completely nuts. And obviously he sometimes has hands, and he uses the aggression in a good way, and it's just the impression that he's very crazy, and in reality he's way less crazy than it seems. But people get the impression they are playing against a complete maniac and basically pay him off always.
So you're going to remember more of the times when you're pushed out of a pot. You're going to remember more of the times that your hero called on the river, because those are more painful moments or frustrating moments. A lot of times when, whatever, you bet flop with top pair and you bet again on the turn and they fold, just like that's over. You don't think about it. And also just the sample sizes, especially if you're playing live poker, they're just too small. Like if
I already mentioned that. I also hate playing live, because you get like 20 hands in an hour. That's already a lot. And it's just boring. And especially if it's a table with a lot of nits and it's not that a juicy table, it can be very, very bad. And this is also something you should definitely avoid. I get really bored. And then I started playing bad as well. And with bad, I mean you're getting involved with hands pre-flop that I shouldn't get involved in. And usually also the live games are not as high as I would like them to be. And then it's even easier to get involved with trashy hands. Because yeah, you don't really care about the money. I mean, if it would be like 5,100 blinds, I probably wouldn't do it. But yeah, if it's so cheap, why not? And you can also talk yourself in a lot of bad things, like, oh, I have such a huge edge, so I probably can add another 10% of hands. Where in reality, this probably isn't true.
If over the course of 1 week, you're playing at a 9-handed table with the same 8 people, how many times are you going to see one player have the opportunity to fold to a river bet? It's not very often. And, let's say that they fold on average 50% of the time, and you've seen, I'm totally guessing, but let's say you've seen 25 opportunities for them to fold. It's really easy for them to have folded 18 of 25 just because they've been unlucky in their hand distribution over those 25 hands. Just not a lot of data. So really focus on showdowns, because it only takes one showdown where you see somebody like value bet a hand that has no business value betting, or you see them bluff with like a pretty crazy
Yeah,
hand.
showdowns are definitely very helpful, because otherwise you are just guessing. And yes, when you see someone doing something with a hand he's absolutely supposed to do something else with, then you know that he's terrible. Otherwise, you're more or less just guessing. I mean, if you never see a showdown, but someone is playing 100% of hands, then you probably already know that he's bad. But yeah, still. I mean, showdowns help a lot to build good reads.
Or you see them not bluff with the bottom of their range. That tells you so much about the way that they play. So much faster than seeing, 100 hands play out where you don't get to see their cards. So the only point I wanted to make is pay attention to showdowns, and pay attention to showdowns.
So Phil, speaking for yourself, when you're gathering data, looking to make adjustments, is that a gut reaction? You're just slowly getting a feeling, I think he's doing this, or is it much more
It's also so sick. What would I say? Well, I forgot what I was going to say. What was it? Yeah. Remembering again. People's playing style could change completely based on the mood they are in. So someone could be loose passive, but once they lose a certain threshold amount, they got really angry and turn into a maniac. That's also things you should pay attention to.
conscious in front of mind where you're saying, okay, he's done something like that 8 times. I think that means that it's 60% likely that he's making this type of mistake. So the adjustment I make would be this.
Yeah. So let me give an answer that's potentially usable. So in finding these reads on your opponent, I'd love to talk about how to go about developing them and how I go about finding them. The issue is there are 2 very separate answers to that. And one of them is, if you're playing online on a site that has hand histories, you have access to a lot of data. And if you're playing against the same opponent for long enough,
use tracking software. I mean, you don't need to use Holdem Manager. The other big product is Pokertracker. I also got a link down there. Yeah, I think you can also test both for a certain period. So yeah, test which one suits you better and then choose that one.
a lot of data on that opponent. And so data and statistics become a huge part of figuring that out. And so it's not only, let me skip back. If you don't have that, either because you're playing live or because you're playing on a site that doesn't provide hand histories, or because you're just playing against somebody, you play 200 hands against them, it's not enough to have any reliable statistics, then it's all about showdowns. It's all about looking at showdowns. And in that case, what I do is I do watch a hand play out. And basically, if I see at showdown a spot where like they check with a very good bluffing hand, or they bluff with like a really bad bluffing hand, no relevant blockers. And then I start to think, okay, well, maybe they underbluff or maybe they overbluff. And I keep an eye out for it. You know, supporting evidence that they overbluff is not always obvious. So let's say you think somebody overbluffs. Part of the supporting evidence you can get for that is that when they check, they don't show like potential bluffing hands. They always show, oh, I have second pair. Oh, I have third pair. Oh, I have top pair. And so that can support the evidence that, well, you've seen them bet a couple hands that you don't think should bet. You haven't seen them check a hand that you think should bluff. And those things add up over time. And then you can also, like, less reliable data is...
Yeah, online, you usually can see both whole cards in the showdown, but live, often only the winner gets shown. So then it's even harder to build this read because people just muck their hands and they are not good.
You know, when they check, it doesn't seem like they're check folding a lot because maybe all of the hands that would have to check fold have bluffed, for example. That's that way. And then if you have access to statistics, it's much different because in addition to the showdowns, you can see, oh, well, their fold percentage is too high in this spot. From there, you do have to kind of investigate, okay, why is it too high? Because there could be a lot of explanations. First of all, it could be, they fold hands that they shouldn't. But second of all, it could be they get there with too many weak hands, either because they didn't bluff them earlier or because they've value bet too many hands earlier that should either slow play or just pot control, whatever the case may be. And so you go on a mission kind of to find, okay, well, I see that this stat is off by a lot. And it's enough of a sample that I think it's legit. So level one is you could just be like, all right, I'm just going to bluff here a lot. And that will work. But
that's all. I feel like that's usually what most player would do, where I see, okay, he folds too much. That's also what I usually did. Because I see, okay, the Holdem Manager stats folds to whatever, turn C bets 70%. I'm like, okay, it's insanely profitable to bet against this guy, so I bet again. But investigating why this stat is obviously way better because you can make even better adjustments when you know what exactly is going on, not just see the result of that.
To find the best counter adjustment, you have to kind of find the root cause. And it's okay, so they're folding a lot here. Why? Is it like I said, because they just fold hands that should not fold, or they've gotten there with a messed up range? And usually when you investigate, you'll find that they did get there with a messed up range, and actually elsewhere they have messed up ranges too, and you actually find new things to take advantage of. And so that's why I like to investigate further. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Good video. Yeah, I will link you to videos that you could watch as well. And obviously, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, all the good things, and share it with someone who might find this also useful. Bye until next time.